true leadership reveals itself in chaos. We hear that phrase all the time, right? But what does it actually mean when the entire system, political, social, everything is just collapsing around you?
Exactly.
How do you lead when everyone around you is just gripped by fear and also by this really deep fundamental doubt about whether the state will even exist tomorrow?
And historically, that exact moment, that's when leaders tend to abandon principle. It's almost a given.
Right.
They go for brute force, they grab arbitrary power, whatever panic-driven short-term fix seems to work.
Just survive the next 24 hours.
Precisely. But today, we're diving into a scenario that offers this profound counterexample, a time when leadership chose not chaos, but absolute moral clarity, an authority anchored in law and in faith.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yep.
Our mission today is to look at this period of just intense crisis under the first caliph, Abu Bakr As-Siddiq. We're specifically reviewing cases 17 to 24, which detail his response to what was, for all intents and purposes, a national emergency.
And it's so much more than just military strategy.
Oh, way beyond that. This is a detailed look at what we're calling a masterclass in constitutional ethics during a period of existential threat.
The context of that crisis it's vital. We have to understand it. We're focusing on the Ridda Wars, the wars of apostasy.
And for this brand new community in Medina, this was not some minor regional revolt.
Not at all. This was a simultaneous, multi-front civil war. We're talking widespread rebellion. You have rival prophets emerging.
Wow.
And entire tribes are refusing to acknowledge the central authority of Medina, specifically, and this is the key, by withholding the state tax, the zakat.
And the second that revenue dries up, the state is basically insolvent.
Immediately. The financial solvency is gone. So you have armed descent on one hand and economic collapse on the other, all happening at the same time.
So the stakes just could not be higher.
From the outside, it must have looked like the whole experiment, this new civil order, was about to just completely collapse.
Yet that's not what happened.
No. The genius of this period is in how Abu Bakr responded. We're going to examine how he took this absolute catastrophe and transformed it. He turned it into a foundational model for how constitutional power should be used.
Balancing that unwavering resolve with mercy.
With profound mercy, yes. And ensuring power was used with humility and always within legal constraints.
So for you listening, the framework we're using is really important, the constitutional doctrine of emergency ethics, because this history, it isn't just stuck in the 7th century.
Not at all.
Our goal here is to pull out these universal principles that can any leader, government, business, community, whatever, to act from deep conviction, not just from panic.
We really want to show how every single decision he made, from how he fielded armies to how he designed peace treaties, was guided by this overarching commitment to the law and the state's foundational covenant.
Okay, let's unpack this doctrine. Let's start at the very heart of crisis management itself, which has to be anchoring your leadership in unshakable conviction. This takes us straight to Section 1 and the first two cases that really define this doctrine.
So case 17, this deals with the sheer magnitude of that initial threat. As we said, the Ridda Wars just erupted everywhere at once.
So you've got major military challenges popping up, and at the same time, the capital itself, Medina, is vulnerable.
It's incredibly vulnerable. And the political pressure from senior companions, from his own advisors, must have been, overwhelming.
So what were they telling him to do? What was the rational advice?
The natural, pragmatic advice would have been to compromise, to negotiate, maybe, let the zakat payment slide for some tribes just for now, and definitely halt the expeditionary force that had been commanded to leave, the one led by Usama.
Okay, so the advice was basically pull back, consolidate your forces, negotiate with the people who were just refusing the tax, and just prioritize survival.
It sounds rational.
It does.
But it represents the politics of panic. Because if you start compromising on core constitutional principles like the non-negotiability of a state tax that funds welfare and public safety, you're signaling that the state itself is weak, that its own laws are optional.
And Abu Bakr's response was, well, it wasn't cautious at all, was it? It was this absolute defining declaration that set the moral and constitutional tone for the entire conflict.
It really did.
We have the quote, which is legendary. By Allah, even if wolves drag the mothers of believers, I will not abandon the command of the messenger of Allah.
That statement is just monumental because of how specific it is. It does three things instantly. First, it defines the crisis not as a political disagreement, but as an absolute moral and constitutional failure by the rebels.
So it's not a negotiation anymore.
It's not. Second, it just flatly rejects all calls for compromise on foundational issues, like the cot, which he saw as an inviolable command. And third,
It anchors his decision not in his own authority, but in precedent.
exactly, the command of the messenger.
Yeah.
It transforms a politically difficult decision into a constitutional obligation. He has no choice.
So when he insisted on sending Usama's army out, leaving Medina even more exposed, that was him demonstrating this principle in action.
It was a huge political risk, and it shocked many of his advisors. But he refused to rescind a prior executive command. He was insisting that the law, once established, must stand, no matter the political expediency. That conviction is what anchors courage.
What really stands out to me is the imagery in that quote. Even if wolves drag the mothers of believers. I mean, he's articulating the absolute worst-case scenario.
He is.
By doing that, he's drawing this moral line in the sand. He's effectively saying that the collapse of the state is preferable to abandoning its foundational principles.
And think of the message that sends. It tells the people, the advisors, the commanders, if our leader is willing to accept the absolute worst outcome rather than abandon this core mandate, then that mandate must be worth fighting for.
So the lesson here is that leadership has to be grounded in something that lasts, not something that changes with the political weather.
It can't be intimidated by short-term fear. If you abandon your core constitutional principle at the first sign of trouble, you've already proven your system has no resilience.
And the modern relevance is, it's everywhere. We see constitutional leaders during emergencies, pandemics, economic crises, security threats. They face this immense pressure to just abandon the rule book.
All the time. Demands to compromise privacy rights, scrap fiscal responsibility, suspend due process, all in the name of speed and security.
This case is a reminder that the real test is resisting those calls. The principle has to outlive the crisis, otherwise the victory is empty.
Right. If, in defending the state, you destroy the very principles that define it, you haven't won. You've just established a new tyranny.
Which brings us to case 18, and this might be the most shocking decision of the whole crisis, given the context.
It's pretty staggering.
You have a civil war threatening to wipe you out. And yet the caliph explicitly refused to suspend civil institutions or enact martial law.
This is so critical. In almost every historical example you can find, when a state faces an existential internal threat, what's the first thing they do?
Martial law. Every time?
Martial law. The executive rules by decree, civil rights are suspended, due process is gone. Abu Bakr refused this option, even with this intense military threat literally surrounding Medina.
I mean, if ever there was a time for it, this was it. Doesn't keeping the courts open distract resources? Doesn't it imply the state is maybe less serious about the rebellion?
See, it implies the exact opposite. By refusing to suspend civil law, he was projecting immense strength, not weakness.
How so?
He ensured that Medina's normal civic life contracts, courts, property disputes, all of it continued operating. Think about the strategic message there.
Good.
The state is fighting for its life on the outside, but on the inside, the rule of law is so deeply rooted, so robust, that it remains sacred. The courts are open for business.
That is just a staggering commitment to legality under that kind of duress. What did refusing martial law specifically prevent?
It prevented the arbitrary detention of citizens. It prevented summary justice, executions without trial. It stopped the seizure of property without legal review. It maintained the civil-military balance.
So the military dealt with the rebels.
But governance inside the capital remained firmly under the established civil legal framework. No exceptions.
The lesson there feels monumental. Even under the most extreme threat, you don't suspend civil rights of legal institutions. Because the moment you do,
the fear of collapse has already made you morally indistinguishable from the threat you're fighting. You've surrendered legitimacy before the battle is even won.
you see echoes of this in modern constitutional emergency clauses, right? The ones designed to limit executive power during a crisis.
Exactly. Those clauses exist for this very reason. They define temporary measures and require oversight precisely to prevent a crisis from permanently eroding the very institutions the state is supposed to be protecting.
So he demonstrated that the stability of the capital didn't depend on the height of its walls, but on the enduring strength of the law within those walls.
Absolutely. The decision proved that law and order aren't just peacetime luxuries. They are the fundamental mechanics of a legitimate government, even when you're facing an armed insurrection.
Okay, let's move on to Section 2, to the structure of command. It's one thing to declare your principles from the capital, but But implementing them across a huge, volatile territory is a whole other challenge.
And this crisis was geographically distributed, very much so. Which brings us to Case 19, Delegation under Law and Ethics.
Right, because the Ridda Wars weren't just one big battle. You had Musaylima in one region, Sajja in another, various rebellions all over the place.
He couldn't possibly manage every skirmish himself, so he had to appoint capable commanders, people like Khalid ibn Abu Walid. But just picking the right people was only the first step. The crucial part was the mechanism of delegation itself.
And the detail here, which lifts this from just good military strategy into constitutional ethics, is that the delegation came with clear, ethical, written mandates for each commander.
Precisely. These weren't just orders to go and win.
They were more like constitutional instructions.
That's the perfect way to put it. These mandates emphasized justice, discipline, and ethical conduct in all military actions. This was a direct extension of the rule of law we just talked about in Case 18.
So the commanders had immense power.
But that power was explicitly bounded by clear, non-negotiable ethical guidelines. Guidelines on how to treat non-combatants, property, and crucially, the terms of surrender.
So the lesson isn't just delegate effectively. It's that lawful delegation multiplies your efficiency without sacrificing accountability.
You distribute power, but you retain moral control over how that power is used. You ensure the war is fought justly.
This feels like a textbook definition of civil-military constitutional balance.
It is. It ensures military action is governed by clear ethical instructions from the civil authority, the caliph. It prevents commanders from turning into warlords who commit atrocities in the name of the state.
Because their mandate is clear, it's written down, and it's ethically bounded.
They know that if they deviate, they'll face accountability, not a reward.
I find this fascinating because in a desperate civil war, the temptation must be to just give your generals a blank check. Just solve the problem, we'll sort out the ethics later.
But Abu Bakr completely inverted that. He said, the ethics are the solution, and they are embedded in your orders. If the military wins the war by abandoning the state's ethical mandate, then the state has morally failed.
Okay, let's connect that to Case 20. Because you need more than just rules on paper. You have to inspire loyalty and confidence. This is about personal courage and moral calm.
Right. It's not enough to just send others out to fight. You have to personally set the ethical and emotional standard.
And the sources note he did this by personally accompanying the troops as they left Medina.
Yes. Now, he couldn't lead the armies himself because of his duties in the capital, but this physical, symbolic presence was incredibly powerful.
It's the image, isn't it? The head of state at the point of greatest danger. He's not sitting safely behind the walls. He's physically there, sharing the risk, even for a short time. That must have been a huge boost to morale.
A huge boost to the troops leaving, and it inspired profound trust among the citizens who saw it happen.
And there's another layer here, a moral one.
A vital layer. While he was with them, he reportedly recited verses of patience and perseverance. This wasn't a tactical send-off. It wasn't just a motivational speech. This was an act of governance. He was reinforcing morale through spiritual and moral strength.
He's using his own spiritual discipline as a governance tool, modeling that unshakable inner calm you need to make decisions based on principle, not on fear.
Exactly. The lesson is that personal courage and that kind of symbolic presence, they inspire far greater obedience and trust than mere words ever could. Moral calm is a tangible, potent leadership tool.
It calms the troops, and by extension, it calms the citizens who hear about their leader's steadfastness.
It reminds me of the symbolic role modern leaders play in a crisis. When they visit a disaster zone or address the nation from the front lines.
Right. Those actions are rarely about tactics. They're about projecting that moral calm and demonstrating a shared resilience.
That presence tells people, our mission is sound, my conviction is unshakable. It grounds the whole fight in something deeper than just winning a battle.
And it connects the dots, doesn't it? It connects the ethical mandates given to the commanders in Case 19 to the personal integrity of the leader in Case 20. The commanders have their written rules, and now they see the leader demonstrating the internal fortitude required to uphold them.
The system is coherent from top to bottom.
Let's shift gears now to Section 3, Justice, Proportionality, and the Ethics of Victory. Because winning the war is one thing, but ending it ethically, establishing a lasting peace, that's the real test.
Absolutely. Victory has to be governed by ethics. Otherwise, you're just trading one kind of instability for another. If your victory just breeds resentment, you're going to be fighting another civil war in a generation.
And this brings us to Case 21, Forgiveness and avoiding vengeance.
Yes. The initial mandate Abu Bakr issued was crystal clear. Once rebels surrendered and came back to the fold, absolutely no vengeance was to be taken.
That immediately separates him from a conquering dictator who's just looking for retribution.
And this is where you see the philosophical basis for reconciliation embedded right into the operational orders. We have that policy quote that just sums up the whole approach. Whoever returns to obedience has his rights restored and his blood protected.
That is so profound,
Huh.
because it's a mechanism for immediate reintegration. It's a clear path back to citizenship.
It says, the moment you lay down your arms and return to the constitutional community, you are a citizen again. Full stop. You don't face persecution, you don't have your property seized, you don't face indefinite detention.
The lesson there feels paramount. The ultimate purpose of law, even in war, is reform and reconciliation, not revenge.
Because vengeance creates endless cycles of violence. Reform creates stable societies. Victory is only completed by integration, not by punishment.
Now, a modern historian might argue this was just political pragmatism. He needed those tribes back in the economy, back in the military. How do we know this was genuine moral commitment?
That's an excellent challenge. And I think the distinction lies in the completeness of the restoration of rights.
Yeah.
If it were purely pragmatic, he might have let the former rebels live, but restricted their property or their political participation for a generation. But the sources indicate a full restoration of rights, property, social status, everything, once they showed sincere repentance and return to obedience. That goes beyond mere political expedience.
It's a conviction that the government must be a reforming force.
Yes. And it connects directly to modern ideas of restorative justice, like truth and reconciliation commissions. The focus is on healing the rift, restoring rights, and building a future, not just dwelling on the past conflict.
And psychologically, it must have created a powerful incentive for rebels to surrender quickly.
Of course, if they know the system is restorative, not purely punitive, they're far more likely to lay down their arms. That saves countless lives on both sides.
Okay, but let's pair that with the need for accountability, which brings us to case 22, proportionality and punishment. If everyone is just instantly forgiven, there's no deterrence. Treason has to mean something.
This is where the concept of due process comes in, applied under the most extreme duress. The procedure was very strict and highly targeted.
Who was punished?
Only the undisputed ringleaders of treason. And crucially, they were only punished after fair hearings, with witnesses and clear evidence that they led the armed effort to overthrow the state.
So no collective punishment. It wasn't mass execution of everyone who followed the rebellion. It was targeted justice, backed by a visible legal process.
Exactly. This ensures proportionality. The vast majority of people who maybe followed their leaders out of confusion or tribal loyalty were offered that path of forgiveness from Case 21.
But the architects of the rebellion faced legal consequences. But even for them, the state had to prove its case.
Yes. And think about the political risk of insisting on due process for powerful traitors when the state is still so fragile. The victorious soldiers, the public, they would have been demanding swift, emotional retribution.
A hearing risks looking soft, or just wasting time.
The short-term political move would have been summary executions. Absolutely. But Abu Bakr recognized that justice without proportionality quickly becomes tyranny. Due process is essential even for the most severe crimes because it proves that the state, unlike the rebels, respects law above temporary passion.
It proves the state operates by rules, not by raw emotion, and that's the very definition of legitimacy.
It's the bedrock of proportional sentencing. It reinforces that the rule of law applies equally to everyone, even those who try to dismantle the government. The public spectacle of a fair process, even for traitors, reinforces the system's strength.
Okay, let's move into our final section, Section 4. This is all about resilience and the restoration of normal life. Because, as we said, battlefield victory is only half the story.
The true success is how quickly you can get back to pre-crisis stability. And Case 23 highlights this fascinating, often overlooked aspect of governance: spiritual resilience.
The action itself seems almost mundane, doesn't it? But the context is everything.
The sources detail that Abu Bakr maintained his spiritual discipline by ensuring the 5 daily prayers and congregation continued, even during the siege of Medina.
Wait, during the siege, when the city is under immediate threat, when you'd think every able-bodied person should be on the walls or preparing for a fight.
Yes. And this isn't just about personal piety. This is a calculated act of public confidence. It's a governance strategy.
So what's the lesson?
That spiritual discipline and moral resilience are fundamental components that sustain political stability. They sustain the capacity for ethical governance during extreme stress.
I see. It's a public act of defiance against the chaos. If the caliph is calm enough, grounded enough to lead the routine daily prayers, then things can't be that bad.
It sends a message of moral fortitude to the entire population. The essential rhythms of life continue. It provides a steady, visible anchor.
In modern terms, you could say moral resilience gives a leader a stable internal foundation that prevents chaotic, erratic decision-making.
It does. When you're spiritually or morally grounded, you project an unshakable consistency that's contagious. It's the opposite of that fight-or-flight response, which so often leads to the abuse of power.
So this transforms personal discipline into a public governance tool. By continuing that daily routine, he's assuring everyone that the constitutional and communal order is still functioning.
It creates a buffer against mass hysteria. If leadership maintains its daily, visible routine during the darkest moments, it projects stability. It reinforces the idea that the institutions will endure.
Which brings us, finally, to Case 24, the actual definition of victory, the restoration of public confidence. What happens immediately after the military success?
Immediately after securing the capital and breaking the major rebel forces, Abu Bakr took specific, visible, non-military actions.
Okay.
The sources highlight two key things. He reestablished local councils, and he immediately reopened the trade routes.
That is so crucial. It's the difference between a conqueror and a constitutional leader. A conqueror imposes their permanent military will,
while a constitutional leader restores the conditions for normal, self-sustaining civic life.
So why those two actions specifically? Reopening trade routes.
That signals immediate economic stability and communication. It tells people they can get back to their lives, their commerce, without fear of military occupation or economic isolation. It's the fastest path back to solvency.
And restoring local councils. That's dispersing power back to the local level. It says, you don't need me to rule you by decree anymore. Your own self-governance structures are back online.
It's a powerful signal that the central government's role is defense and support, not domination.
So the lesson here is that the true measure of success for emergency leadership isn't how long you hold on to power,
but how quickly and effectively you can restore normal life and civil institutions. If those emergency powers linger, the leader has failed the ethical test.
You see a direct parallel there to modern reconstruction efforts after a conflict or disaster. The emergency response has to have a clear, rapid off-ramp back to civilian governance.
Abu Bakr's swift restoration actions defined his success as being limited to defense and the preservation of the law, not the permanent expansion of his own executive authority. The crisis was solved, and the constitutional status quo was not just restored, but actually strengthened.
This has been a tremendously detailed deep dive. Let's try to bring all these threads together now and review this constitutional doctrine of emergency ethics.
Right. From these 8 cases, we've seen 8 distinct precedents for how constitutional power should function under existential threat. And they really are timeless.
The first 2 takeaways were about internal strength and maintaining the structure of the law, even under siege.
Exactly. Number 1, faith anchors courage, panic destroys order. You have to maintain your core mandate. And number 2, civil institutions must remain active. They are not negotiable.
Then we looked at how power was executed out in the field through structured delegation and personal example.
That was number 3. Delegation must be lawful and ethical with written mandates. And number 4, leadership by example strengthens morale. Projecting moral calm is a governance strategy.
Then we moved to the ethics of what happens after the conflict, the difference between justice and vengeance.
Number 5, justice, not revenge, completes victory by providing a path to reintegration. And number 6, punishment must be proportionate and procedural, due process even for traitors.
And finally, the essential steps for long-term stability, demonstrating resilience and then committing to a return to normalcy.
Number 7, spiritual resilience sustains governance by anchoring the leadership. And number 8, the goal of crisis management is restoration, not domination. Success is measured by how fast normal life returns.
When you lay all 8 of those out, you realize this wasn't just a successful military campaign. It was a success of moral philosophy and constitutional design applied under the most intense pressure imaginable.
It was. Abu Bakr proved that in the harshest emergencies, law and faith can and must govern together. He demonstrated empirically that mercy can triumph over fear, and that principled conduct is ultimately the most effective path to national stability.
He defined the limits of executive power by imposing them on himself first.
Precise.
This whole deep dive really reveals something profound about leadership under extreme pressure. History is just so clear on this. Power tests the soul of every single leader.
It absolutely does. When all the normal constraints seem to vanish because of the urgency of the moment, the temptation to seize permanent arbitrary power, it's overwhelming.
So the test isn't just whether you can beat the external threat. It's whether you can maintain the principles you claim to be fighting for while you're winning the battle.
And Abu Bakr clearly understood that preserving the ethical constitution was the greater victory. By limiting his own power, by ensuring due process for his enemies, by focusing on a swift restoration. He didn't just save the state. He defined what a legitimate ethical state should look like for centuries.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. How do you define the ethical limit of executive power when facing an existential threat? Where is your own constitutional line drawn, knowing that the principles you abandon in a panic are almost never regained? Because what history seems to show is that courage guided by conscience, that's what builds nations that actually endure.